Hello. Um, Here's to the next 146 pages of this book, hopefully to learn something. Let's start with the preface, or a little side note. What Tarquin the Proud said in his garden with the poppy blooms was understood by the sun, but not by the messenger. Not just in commerce, but in the world of ideas to our age is putting on a veritable clearance sale. Everything can be had so dirt cheap that one begins to wonder whether in the end anyone will want to make a bid. Every speculative scorekeeper who conscientiously marks up momentous march of modern philosophy, every lecturer, crammer, student, everyone on the outskirts of philosophy or at its center is unwilling to stop with doubting everything. They all go further. It would perhaps be malapropos to inquire. Um, malapropos to inquire where they think they are going. Though surely we may, in all politeness and respect, take it for granted that they have indeed doubted everything. Otherwise, it would be odd to talk of going further. The preliminary step is one they have all of them taken, and presumably with so little effort as to feel no need to drop some word about how, for not even someone genuinely anxious for a little enlightenment on this will find such. Not a gesture that might point him in the right direction, no small dietary prescription for how to go about such a huge task. But Descartes did it, didn't he? A venerable, humble, honest thinker whose writing surely no one can read without being most deeply stirred. Descartes must have done what he said and said he has done, a rare enough occurrence in our own time. Descartes, as he himself repeatedly insists, was no doubter in his faiths. Um, Descartes has not cried fire and made everybody and oh my God, why can I read? And made it everyone's duty to doubt. For Descartes, I think it's Descartes, was quite a lonely thinker, not blowing a street watch. He was modest enough to allow that his method was important only for himself and sprang partly from his own earlier bunging, bungling, my God, bungling with knowledge. What those old Greeks, whom one must also credit with a little knowledge of philosophy, took to be the task of a whole lifetime, doubt not being a skill one acquires in days and weeks, what the old veteran warrior achieved after keeping the balance of doubt in the face of um, invigilaments, fearlessly rejecting the certainties of sense and thought incorruptibly defying selfish anxieties and wheedling of sympathy. Oh my God, of sympathies. That is where nowadays everyone begins. Today, nobody will stop with faith. They all go further. It would perhaps be rash to inquire where to, but surely a mark of urbanity and good breeding on my part to assume that in fact everyone does indeed have faith. Otherwise, it would be odd to talk of going further. In those old days, it was different, for then faith was a task for a whole lifetime, not a skill thought to be acquired in either days or weeks. When the old campaigner approached the end, had fought the good fight, and kept his faith, his heart was still young enough to not have forgotten the fear and trembling that disciplined his youth, in which, although the grown man mastered it, no man altogether outgrows, unless he somehow manages at the earliest possible opportunity to go further. Where these venerable figures arrived, our own age begins in order to go further. The present author is no philosopher. He had not understood the system, nor does he know if there really is one or if it has been completed. As far as his own weak head is concerned, the thought of what huge heads everyone must have in order to have such huge thoughts is already enough. Even if one were able to render the whole of the content of faith into conceptual form, it would not follow that one had grasped faith, grasped how one came to it, or how it came to one. The present author is no philosopher. He is a poetic et eleganter. To put in poetic and well chosen terms, a freelance who neither writes the system nor makes any promises about it, who pledges neither anything about the system nor himself to it. He writes because for him doing so is a luxury, the more agreeable and conspicuous the fewer who buy and read what he writes. In an age where passion has been done away with for the sake of science, he easily foresees this fate. In an age when an author who wants readers must be careful to write in a way that he can be comfortably leafed through dining for through during the after dinner nap and be sure to present himself to a world like the polite gardener's boy and the advertiser, who, hat in hand with good references from his previous place of employment, recommends himself to a much esteemed public. He foresees his fate will be to be completely ignored, has a dreadful foreboding that the shortage shudders at what terrifies him even more, that some enterprising recorder or paragraph swallower who, to rescue learning, is always willing to do others' writings what to preserve good taste. Trop nobly did the destruction of the human race will slice him into sections as ruthlessly as the man who in the service of science of punctuation divided up his speech by counting the words and putting a full stop after every 50 and count wait every 50 after every 50 and a semicolon after every 35. No, I prostrate myself before any systematic bag searcher. This is not the system. It hasn't the slightest thing to do with the system. I wish all good on the system and on the Danish shareholders in the omnibus, for it will hardly become a tower. I wish them good luck and prosperity, one and all. So that was the end of the preface. Are any chips in here still? Crumbs. You can make eggs with that. Or, something with eggs. Right? Atonement. There was once a man, he had learned as a child that beautiful tale of how God tried Abraham, how he withstood the tests, kept his faith, and for the second time received a son against every expectation. When he became older, he read the same story with even greater admiration, for life had divided what had been united in the child's pious simplicity. The older he became, the more often his thoughts turned to that tale. His enthusiasm became stronger and stronger, and yet less and less could he understand it. Finally, it put everything else out of his mind. His soul had but one wish, actually to see Abraham, and one longing, to have been witness to those events. It was not the beautiful regions of the east, nor earthly splendor of the promised land he longed to see, not the God fearing couple whose old age God had blessed, not the venerable figure of the patriarch stricken in years, not the youthful vigor of God, gave to Isaac, it would have been the same if it had taken place on the barren heath. What he yearned for was to accompany them on a 3-day journey. When Abraham rode with grief before him and Isaac by his side, he wanted to be there at the moment when when Abraham raised his eyes and saw the distance, the mountain and Moriah. The moment he left the asses behind and went up on to the mountain alone with Isaac, for what occupied him was not the finely wrought fabric of imagination, but the shudder of thought. Whoa. This man was no thinker. He felt no need to go further than faith. To be remembered as its father seemed to him to be surely the greatest glory of all, and to have it a lot to be envined even if no one else knew. This man was no learned exegete. He knew no Hebrew. He had known Hebrew, then perhaps it might have been easy for him to understand the story of Abraham. I'm guessing this is like an excerpt from whatever verse it's from. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou dost love, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. It was early morning. Abraham rose in a good time, and the asses saddled and left in his tent, taking Isaac with him. But Sarah watched them from the window as they went down the valley, until she could see them no more. They rode into silence for 3 days. They rode in silence for 3 days. On the morning of the fourth, Abraham still said not a word, but raised his eyes and saw afar the mountain of Moriah. He left the lads behind and went up alone on the mountain with Isaac beside him. But Abraham said to himself, I won't conceal from Isaac where this way is leading him. He stood still, laid his hand on Isaac's head to give him his blessing, and Isaac bent down to receive it. And Abraham's expression was fatherly, his gaze gentle, his speech encouraging, but Isaac could not understand him. His soul could not be uplifted. He clung to Abraham's knees, pleaded at his feet, begged for his young life, for his fair promise. He called to mind the joy in Abraham's house, reminded him of the sorrow and loneliness. Then Abraham lifted the boy up and walked with him, taking him by the hand, and his words were full of comfort and exhortation. But Isaac could not understand him. Abraham climbed the mountain of Moriah, but Isaac did not understand him. Then he turned away from Isaac for a moment, but when Isaac saw his face a second time, it was changed. His gaze was wild, his mien was one of horror. He caught Isaac by the chest, threw him to the ground, and said, Foolish boy, do you believe I am your father? I am an adulterer. Idolater? Do you believe this is God's command? No, it's my own desire. Then Isaac trembled and in anguish cried, God in heaven, have mercy on me. God of Abraham, have mercy on me. If I have no father on earth, then be thou my father. But below his breath, Abraham said to himself, Lord in heaven, I think thee, it is after all better that he believe I am a monster than that he lose faith in thee. Whoa. When the child is to be weaned, the mother blackens her breast, for it would be a shame were the breast to look pleasing when the child is not to have it. So the child believes that the breast has changed, but the mother is the same, her look loving and tender as ever. Luckily, the one that needed no more terrible means to wean the child. It was early morning. Abraham rose in good time, embraced Sarah, the bride of his old age, and Sarah kissed Isaac, who had taken her disgrace from her, was her pride and hope for all generations. So they rode on in silence, and Abraham's eyes were fixed on the ground until the fourth day, when he looked up and saw far the mountain of Moriah. But he turned his gaze once again to the ground. Silently he arranged the firewood, bound Isaac. Silently he drew the knife. Then he saw the ram that God had appointed. He sacrificed that and returned home. From that day on, Abraham became old. He could not forget that God had demanded this of him. Isaac throve as before, but Abraham's eyes were darkened. He saw no joy anymore. When the child was grown, and it is to be weaned, the mother virginally covers her breast, so the child no more has a mother. Luckily, the child that lost its mother in no other way. It's early morning. Abraham rose in good time, kissed Sarah, the young mother, and kissed Isaac, her delight, her joy, her forever. And Abraham rode thoughtfully on. He thought of Hagar and the son whom he had driven out into the desert. He climbed the mountain of Moriah and drew his knife. It was tranquil. It was a tranquil evening when Abraham rode out alone, and he rode to the mountain in Moriah. He threw himself on his face. He begged God to forgive his sins at having been willing to sacrifice Isaac, at the father's having forgotten his duty to his son. He rode more frequently on his lonely way, but found no peace. He could not comprehend that it was a sin to have been willing to sacrifice to God the best he owned, that for which he would many at a time have gladly laid down his own life. And if it was a sin, if he had not so loved Isaac, then he could not understand that it could be forgiven, for what sin was more terrible? When a child is to be weaned, the mother too is not without sorrow, that she and the child grow more and more apart, that the child which first lay beneath her heart, yet later rests at her breast, should no longer be so close. Thus, together they suffer this brief sorrow. Luckily, the one who kept the child so close and had no need to sorrow no more. It was early morning. Everything had been made ready for the journey in Abraham's house. Abraham took leave of Sarah and the faithful servant Eliezer, followed him out in the way until he had to turn back. They rode together in accord, Abraham and Isaac, until they came to the mountain of Moriah. Yet Abraham made everything ready for sacrifice calmly and quietly, but he turned away from Isaac, saw that Abraham's left hand was clenched in anguish, that a shudder went through his body, but Abraham drew the knife. Then they turned home again, and Sarah ran to meet them, but Isaac had lost his faith. Never a word in the whole world is spoken of this, and Isaac had told no one. Isaac told no one what he had seen, and Abraham's never suspected that anyone had seen it. When the child is to be weaned, the mother has more solid food at hand, so that the child will not perish. Luckily, the one who has more solid food at hand. In these and similar ways, the man whom we speak thought about those events. Every time he came home from a journey to the mountain in Moriah, he collapsed in weariness, clasped his hands, and said, "Yet no one was as great as Abraham, who is able to understand him." Bruh. One second. What do I do? Speech in praise of Abraham. If there was no eternal consciousness in a man, if at the bottom of everything there were a wild ferment, a power that twisting in dark passions produced everything great and inconsequential, if unfathomable, insatiable emptiness lay hid beneath everything, what then would life be but despair? If it were thus, if there were no sacred bond uniting mankind, if one generation rose up after another like the leaves of the forest, if one generation succeeded the other as long, the other as the songs of birds in the woods, if the human race passed through the world as a ship through the sea or the wind through the desert, a thoughtless and fruitless whim, if an eternal oblivion always lurked hungrily for its prey, and there were no power strong enough to wrest it from the clutches, how empty and devoid of comfort would life be? But for that reason it is not so, and as God created man and woman, so too he slapped the heroes and the poet or speech marker. The latter has none of these skills of the former. He can only admire, love, take pleasure in the hero. Yet he too, no less than the hero, is happy, for the hero is, so to speak, that better nature of his in which he is enamored. Though happy that it is not himself, that his love can indeed be admiration, he is the spirit of remembrance, can only bring to mind what has been done, do nothing but admire what has been done. He takes nothing of himself, but is jealous of his charge. He follows his heart's desire, but having found what he sought, he wanders round in front of everyone's door with his song and his speech, that all can admire the hero as he does, be proud of the hero as he is. That is his achievement. Be humble. Task. This is faithful service in the hero's house. If he remains thus true to his love, if he struggles night and day against the wiles of oblivion, which would cheat him of his hero, then he has fulfilled his task. He is united with the hero who in his turn has loved him just as faithfully. For the poet is, so to speak, the hero's better nature, ineffectual certainty as a memory is. But I just want to stop. Oh, or just keep going. Yeah, I guess that's 10 pages. I just want to stop. I'm just going to stop here. I'm sorry. No, I gotta keep going, man. I gotta keep going. I already haven't done enough tonight. Oh, there it is. Huh. Also transfigured as a memory is, therefore no one who was great will be forgotten, however long it takes, even if a cloud of misunderstanding should take the hero away. His lover still comes, and the more time goes by, the more faithfully he sticks up by him. No, no one shall be forgotten who was great in this world, but everyone was great in his own way, and everyone in proportion to the greatness of what he loved, for he who loved himself became a great in himself, and he who loved others became great through his devotion, but he who loved God became greater than all. They shall all be remembered, but everyone became great in proportion to his expectancy. One became great through expecting the possible, another by expecting the eternal. But he who expected the impossible became greater than all. They shall all be remembered, but everyone was great in proportion to the magnitude of what he strove with. For he who strove with the world became great by conquering the world, and he who strove with himself became greater by conquering himself. But he who strove with God became greater than all. Thus there was strife in the world, man against man, one against thousands, but he who strove with God was greater than all. Thus there was strife upon earth. There was he who conquered everything by his own strength, and he who conquered God by his powerlessness. There was one who relied upon himself and gave everything, and one who, secure in his own strength, sacrificed everything, but greater than all was the one who believed in God. There was one who was great in his strength, and one who was great in his wisdom, and one who was great in hope, and one who was great in love. But greater than all was Abraham, great with that power whose strength is powerlessness, great in that wisdom whose secret is folly, great in that hope whose outward form is insanity, great in that love which is hatred of self. Damn, that's good. Where's... This is kind of sick. I'm just gonna put dope. Especially that end part. Wherever it says Abraham right here. It was by his faith that Abraham could leave the land of his fathers to become a stranger in the land of promise. He left one thing behind, took another with him. He left behind his worldly understanding and took him with his faith. Otherwise, he would surely not have gone. Certainty it would have been senseless to do so. It was by his faith that he could be a stranger in the promised land. There was nothing to remind him of what was dear, but the novelty of everything tempted his soul to sad longing. And yet he was God's chosen, in whom the Lord was well pleased. Yes, indeed, if only he had been disowned, cast out from God's grace, he would have understood it better. As it was, it looked more like mockery of himself and his faith. There was once another who lived in exile from the beloved land of fathers. He is not forgotten, nor his songs of lament in which the sorrow he sought and fought. What he had lost from Abraham, we have no song of lament. It is human to complain, human to weep with one who weeps, but it is greater to have faith and more blessed to behold the believer. It was faith that made Abraham accept the promise that all nations of earth should be blessed in his seed. Time went by, the possibility was still there, and Abraham had faith. Time went by, it became unlikely, and Abraham had faith. There was once another who held out expectation. Time went by, evening drew near. He was not so pitiful as to forget his expectation, therefore he too should not be forgotten. Then he sorrowed, and the sorrow did not deceive him as life had done. It did all it could for him, and in the sweetness of sorrow he possessed his disappointed expectation. It is human to sorrow with the sorrower, but greater to have faith and more blessed to behold the believer. From Abraham we have no song of sorrow. As time went by, he did not mournfully count these days. He did not cast suspicious glances at Sarah, fearing she was growing old. He did not stay the march of the sun so that Sarah should not grow old, and with her his expectations. He did not soothingly sing to Sarah his mournful lay. Abraham became old, and Sarah was mocked in the land, and still he was God's chosen and heir to the promise that in his seed all nations of the earth will be blessed. Would it not be better then were he not chosen by God? What is it to What is to be chosen by God? Is it to be denied in youthful one's age, youthful desire, in order to have it fulfilled in the great travail of old age? But Abraham believed and held firm to his promise. Had Abraham wavered, he would have renounced it. He would have said to God, so perhaps after. Yeah, I'm going to stop there, actually. We're good. I'm going to eat some food. Very cool stuff. Some cool dialect, some very cool rhetoric here. But I'm going to go.